Hi, it's Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at the cheaper Tomahawk. This is the MSI Z790 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi. This is a DDR5 board for 14th, 13th and 12th gen Intel LGA 1700 processors. At the moment in the UK you can pick up one of these for somewhere in the region of about £180, which is about £70 cheaper than the Tomahawk version, which is generally the preferable version. But what do you lose? What do you gain? Is it worth cheaping out very slightly on your motherboard? Do you still get a reasonable amount of features? Hopefully, in this unboxing and overview, all of those questions will be answered and potentially more. So let's get on with it. Now, before we take a quick look at the box and the packaging and see what we actually get inside, I will say I have actually bought this for my own money. This is actually to go into my own video editing rig alongside a Intel 13900K. This is my daily driver, so I've got a little bit of faith in this board already, so that's probably a little bit of a spoiler alert. Although, having said that, if you've watched previous videos, you'll notice that I did have the Z690 Tomahawk recently, which turned out to be a faulty board. So unfortunately, that has had to been returned. It's paid out a little bit more money, so this is a Z790, whereas the previous one was a Z690. So we've come a little bit further, and we do get some other slightly cool features, and there are one or two things on this board which I wish they would have done slightly differently, but we'll go over that when we take a closer deep dive into the board. Taking a look at the packaging, very minimalist. Z790 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi, as you can see, ready for next gen CPUs, Intel Core series supported, and it's the Z790 chipset as you'd expect. On the back of the board, it's going over some of the key features such as the VRM setup. So we've got a 14+1+1 setup in here, digital power stages. We've also got extended heat sinks on pretty much everything. There is an absolute ton of heat sinks over the VRM and also the M.2 slots, all of them in fact, which is really nice to see. We've also got Intel 2.5 gigabit LAN, which personally I would have probably preferred a Realtek solution, but it has actually got the Intel i225 setup on there. You've also got Intel Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. Also, we've got the latest DDR5 support, which currently, as it stands, this supports 192 gigabytes of RAM over the 4 slots, although very shortly that will be updated in a BIOS update to support 256 gigs. Also, we've got Lightning Gen 5 support, so the PCI Express graphics card slot is a Gen 5 one, so this board could have a little bit of longevity when those PCI Express Gen 5 graphics cards actually come out on the shelves. We've also got four M.2 slots, all of which PCI Express Gen 4 x4 support, which is pretty unusual. Normally you get a couple which are maybe PCI Express Gen 3, so I'm really pleased to see that. Would have been nice to have squeezed in a PCI Express Gen 5 M.2 slot at the very top, but those drives are still ridiculously expensive, so I think this works out fine for this particular price point. Also in the box goes through some of the specifications, so I'll put those on the screen for you. Feel free to pause it if you want to have a closer look. And also there's an overview of the rear I/O. Opening the box and looking inside, it's a mixture of the usual suspects, so we get all the usual things you'd expect to see, such as a couple of SATA cables. There's also some M.2 mounting pillars and some of MSI's quick latches, or the M.2 lockers as they are otherwise known. Something which is a little bit of a shame, there's no user manual. You do have to scan a QR code in order to do that, but there is a quick start guide, which also you pretty much have to scan a QR code, which is a little bit of a pain in the backside. But fear not, for those of you that are still rocking those coasters, you can actually use the MSI DVD, and all of the drivers and updates are actually on there, although obviously they will be slightly out of date because it's been recorded ages ago. But there will be a manual on there as well in a PDF format should you wish to use it, if you've got access to a PC with a CD-ROM drive, which I'm guessing is not going to be many of you these days. Also included there are some MSI stickers, so if you want to go mad and adorn your PC with lots of tacky add-ons, feel free to do so. These will probably stay in the box until the end of days. And the last thing, which is pretty handy, there is the new and improved MSI Wi-Fi antenna. This is a mag mount one which can clip onto the back of your PC. I much prefer this over the antennas, which are the traditional kind of ones that you just screw onto the back. These are excellent, means you can put it out of the way and it doesn't interfere with other wiring going into your USB or HDMI sockets. Right, that's that out of the way. Let's take a look at the motherboard itself, and some of the first things I noticed is it's a relatively kind of monochrome-ish setup here. So we've got some sort of steel accents, some black as well, a little bit of chrome going on there as well. It is a little bit on the busy side, if I'm completely honest, with some of the MSI logos here, there, and ever, and splashed around, but this is a Gaming Plus board, so you do have to expect some of that gamer aesthetic. When it comes to the actual specifications, it's not too bad at all. In fact, I'm pretty happy I got this and saved some money over the Z690 or even the Z790 Tomahawks, which are considerably more expensive. We do lose out a little bit on the rear I/O, which we'll take a look at very shortly. Otherwise, the board is very similar. The VRM is a little bit reduced. So the Tomahawk's got a 16+1+1 VRM, whereas this is a 14+1+1. So not quite getting up to those heady heights, unfortunately. But otherwise, it looks and feels very similar. Talking of which, let's take a look at the top section first of all. So at the top here, we've got two EPS or ATX 12 volt connectors. So if you want to supply your processor a little bit of extra juice for overclocking duties, you certainly can do. If we move along, there's also these big heat sinks, which we've referred to already. So these are really nice chunky heat sinks to keep that VRM nice and cool. Moving along from that, on the top there, we've got some headers for fans and for pumps and AIOs, that kind of stuff. So there's three in there in close succession. So you've got the CPU header, then you've got the AIO header, then you've got system fan 1 header. Next to that, there is a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB. So that's for connecting up your addressable RGB components. And then just down from that, there's another 2 fan connectors. So if you've got 3 fans in the front of your PC case and you want to have them all individually controlled, all the connections are there straight away, which is really nice to see. And also something else which is really nice to see is the fact that we do have a diagnostic DLED. These are invaluable. I cannot stress enough how much it makes sense to spend a little bit more money on a motherboard that actually has some form of diagnostic DLED, especially in the days of DDR5 and also LGA sockets, where you rarely know if your CPU is actually under too much tension from the CPU cooler and you're getting all kinds of weird stuff. The diagnostic DLED can help you out, and it certainly has done with me. I found previously when I've used this with a slightly older cooler and I've applied too much tension to it, get some weird readouts on the DLED. It just goes straight to DRAM, which it shouldn't really do. So just reducing some of that tension actually on your CPU cooler rectified the fault, which would have been almost impossible to detect otherwise. RAM-wise, we've got support here for DDR5, and it does support currently, at the time of recording, which is December 2023, it supports up to 7200 megatransfers per second. Now you do have to have somewhat of a caveat with that, depending on your combination of RAM, and if you're using more than 2 slots, that does diminish quite rapidly due to the way that DDR5 works and the integrated memory controllers on Intel processors. But in theory, 7200 megahertz should be relatively easy to get hold of, and potentially on further than there. At the moment on the market, around about 6000 megatransfers or 6400 seems to be that kind of sweet spot in terms of price versus performance. So those are going to be absolutely fine. Again, it's going to come down to your individual processor and its inbuilt memory controller. In the middle there, we've got our LGA 1700 socket. So as I've already said, that supports Intel's 14th, 13th and 12th gen processors on the LGA 1700 socket. Whether or not we'll get another refresh of 14th gen, or whether 15th gen is going to still be on this socket, or whether they're going to move over to the 1861, which looks possible. We don't really know for sure yet. Hopefully there'll be a few more processors coming out on 14th gen to tide this over a few more years. Going back to the other side, so we've got a 24-pin power connector, as you'd expect to see there. Underneath that, front panel connector for USB 3.0 Type A. Underneath that, USB Type C front panel connector. Always nice to see one of those. Underneath that, we've got our Z790 chipset, which doesn't need any additional cooling, so passive cooling there on the chipset. Underneath that, or just to the right of it, we've got 4 SATA ports, and there's a further 2 at the bottom, so we've got 6 SATA ports in total on here, which supports RAID 5 and RAID 10 should you wish to, or you can just use them as individual SATA ports. Before we go down to the rear I/O, we'll take a look back up towards the top here and check out what we've got going on in terms of our M.2s and also our PCI Express slots. So let's first of all take a look at the M.2 slots. Now this is really easy because all of them are PCI Express Gen 4x4. Some of them support NVMe drives, some of them support NVMe and SATA drives. Don't take it for granted that just any old M.2 drive will fit in these sockets. They won't. So looking at the top slot, this is our Lightning Gen 4x4. This one is powered from the CPU, so that is directly connected. PCI Express Gen 4x4, NVMe M.2 PCI Express drives only. And the same goes for this one here, the second slot. So that is also NVMe drives only, no SATA drives at all on there, or SATA-based M.2s. Again, PCI Express Gen 4x4. At the very bottom, underneath this heatsink, there's 2 more sockets. So those both will take PCI Express Gen 4x4, but this also comes from the chipset, as long as this one as well. But this one also will support M.2 SATA-based drives. There's not really many of those on the market these days, but it's nice the fact you can use either. SATA-based drives are going to be considerably slower, so ideally you want to go for NVMe if you possibly can, and get the most out of those PCI Express Gen 4x4 speeds. So that's the drives catered for. Let's take a look at the PCI Express. So PCI Express, this top slot is our PCI Express Gen 5 x 16 slot. So ready and waiting for the latest and greatest PCI Express Gen 5 graphics cards when they eventually hit the shelves. God knows how expensive they're going to be, but no doubt we'll find out in due course. It's also got the larger latch on there as well. So sometimes it's really difficult to actually remove a graphics card. So they've got a slightly extended latch on there to make it a little bit easier to remove the graphics card. The rest of the slots are all going to be PCI Express Gen 3 or Gen 4. So we've got a single PCI Express Gen 3 x 1 slot there. And also the bottom one, although it's a 16 times slot, in the manual it says it's PCI Express Gen 3 x 1. But looking closely, it actually appears that it's wired for more than that. So the wiring for the x1 slot ends there, and this one ends further in here. So I actually think this is a x4 slot, so PCI Express Gen 3x4. I will have to try it out because that would make a lot of sense. If you're someone who is into content creation, maybe you've got some high-end capture cards such as the Elgato 4K, which would really make use of that bandwidth on there. This one up here, PCI Express Gen 4 x 4 apparently, which would have made more sense to be on the bottom because that would have been better for capture cards, giving you that extra bandwidth. If this one is PCI Express Gen 3 x 1, if you've got a relatively large graphics card in here, put in some kind of capture card in a PCI Express Gen 4x4 slot here, is going to be encroaching on that GPU. So in terms of keeping your graphics card cool, it could cause a problem. So ideally I would have looked for seeing those two slots to be reversed how they're set up. But other than that, it's absolutely fine. So that is it for the PCI Express. Let's now take a look at the front panel connections. So if we look in this bottom corner, so there is another addressable RGB just underneath the SATA ports there. So another 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB. Underneath that, JFP2, which is for connecting speakers. Underneath that, JFP1, which is for your front panel I/O, reset switch, hard drive LED, etc. Then you've got the SATA ports, as we said a little bit earlier. There's an additional TPM port there, should you want to use it. There's a JCI, which is a chassis intrusion switch, if you want to use that. Next to that, two USB 2.0 front panel or rear panel headers. Then another USB 3.0 Type A connection. Next at the bottom, there is the Thunderbolt port. So if you want to add on an additional Thunderbolt card, you can do from there. Another two PWM connections there for fans or whatever. Then you've got two normal 12-volt RGB connections. Then you've got your audio, which is the Realtek RTL897 chipset, 7.1 surround supported. And you've got the front panel there, isolated audio. Then you've got your audio capacitors there. And going back up slightly more, you've got your BIOS battery, and the CMOS reset is just there next to the audio capacitors. So let's take a look at the rear I/O, and this is where it is slightly let down, I think. They've got a keyboard and mouse port there, which ideally I'd have loved for them to remove that and just add in another two USB ports. I think that would have made more sense. Although if you are going in for low latency or overclocking, then sometimes using a PS2 port is actually better, but it's kind of pointless, I think, in this particular instance. At the bottom, USB BIOS flashback button, so that's going to be handy. And next to that is the USB flashback port. That just acts as a normal USB in Windows. So those are two USB 2.0 ports. Next up, we've got our DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.0. Both of those support 4K 60Hz with integrated graphics solutions, depending on your processor. Moving along, so we've got the blue ports there. So that's USB 3.2 Gen 1, 5 gigabits per second. Then we've got another two USB 2.0 ports. Next up, we've got our fastest port, so that is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 x 2, so 20 gigabit per second. And above that, we have got a Type A, which is only 10 gigabit per second, but those two are going to be your fastest ports there. Above that, we've got our LAN connection, so that is the Intel i225 chipset on there, providing 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. Then we've got our Wi-Fi 6E connections, SMA connections there, and then we've got our color-coded analog outputs for the 7.1 audio solution. No optical out on this, unfortunately, if that's something you're looking for, but I'm quite happy to see 6 audio outputs on the back anyway. So there you go, that is the Z790 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi from MSI. I've got to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to getting this installed in my PC. I've already gone through this once this week already with the Z690, which then failed miserably. That was a really weird setup. The motherboard, for some reason, had one dead memory channel, so slot 2 didn't work. Slot 4 was okay, eventually I found that out, and for some reason the BIOS would not save settings, so yeah, that was a weird Amazon warehouse deal which went slightly pear-shaped, but I'm actually glad it kind of worked out in this way. So I've got a slightly newer generation motherboard with slightly nicer features, and some of the kinks and quirks from the Z690 chipset have hopefully been ironed out, such as things like the actual retention module being a little bit stiffer and not bending as much as they did with the previous 690 chipsets, which was quite problematic when they first came out. So hopefully that's all going to be all good. So yeah, I'm going to be looking forward to putting this into my PC and giving it some severe testing, seeing how it goes under the stresses of video editing and also gaming as well. So if you've got any comments or questions about this particular board, please do reach out in the comments section below, because I will be keeping this, well, assuming it works, I will be keeping this in my machine for the foreseeable. So if you've got any questions, comments, or just want to know how to configure it, please feel free to ask. We will be doing follow-up videos on this, which may or may not have already come out already. One for how to do a USB BIOS flashback, just so it's got the latest BIOS from the get-go. And also we'll be doing a BIOS tour so you can see how to go in there, do certain configurations, and also a little bit of overclocking. So if you want to see any of those videos or any other of our future content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the chime notification. That way you'll be notified of future video releases. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.